Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Layla, and today I'm going to be doing a reading wrap-up for January. I started the year off strong and read 6 books. I was just flying through these, and honestly, looking back, I talked about this on my finance channel, but I feel like January always feels really long. Like, it still goes fast at the same time, but looking back at these books, I'm like, wow, I read that in January, you know? It felt like so long ago. Per usual, I'm going to go through these in the order that I read them, and I will talk about them and provide my rating. First book that I finished in January 2024 was A Storied Life of A.J. Ficker, and I started this at the end of 2023, actually, and then finished it within like 2 days of January. I would say this is a quick read. It's less than 300 pages and pretty easy to digest and get through. I had kind of high expectations for this one because I watch Haley Pham, and this was one of her 5-star reads. And also, I've heard other people say that this was a 5-star book. It has pretty good rating. What is it on Goodreads? Let me see, actually. 4.03 on Goodreads, which is, you know, that's pretty high up there. And even there were other booktubers that I watched that read this and gave it a pretty high ranking, like above 4 stars. So I was like, okay, I'll really like this. But I feel like this wasn't as good as I expected. As you can tell by the title, this is a book with the main character. His name is A.J. Ficker, and he owns a bookstore. I think they're in New York, and the bookstore isn't doing so well. I think he's like about to close it. He's alone. He's not like in a relationship or anything like that, and he's basically just kind of unhappy with life. He also is somewhat socially awkward. I can't remember if there was like, if he has something or if he's just socially awkward, but he basically will just like say anything that's on his mind or be, his personality is just being like very blunt and matter of fact, you know? But eventually he receives this package at the bookstore, and I'm saying package because that's what they say on the back, and I don't want to, it would kind of be a spoiler if I say what that package really is, because it really changes his life. So once he receives that package, then, you know, a lot of things change in his life and go from there. I would say that this is like a Hallmark movie in a book. Not like those Hallmark Christmas movies. It's not Christmas based or anything like that, but that's the vibes I get from this. Now, I love Hallmark Christmas movies. I think they're super enjoyable to watch. I have seen many of them, and I genuinely enjoy them. But if I were to rate those movies, they wouldn't be like, oh my god, best movie ever. I'm going to rewatch it so many times. I'm going to highly recommend it. They're just like a 3.5, you know? Like a 3.25 to 3.5, and that's what I'm going to give this book, because Hallmark movies are great, but they're not like, wow, best movie I've ever watched, and that's what I got from this book, because it just plays out that way. If you've read it or if you read it, then you'll understand. After that, I read Good Girl, Bad Blood, and if y'all remember from last year, I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I think it was like August or September, and that was one of my favorite books that I read in 2023. I gave that one a 5 stars through and through because it was just so fun. I finished it in less than 24 hours. I had to know what was happening. It was super enjoyable. I love the characters. Everything about it was just beautiful. I loved it so much. It's just such a fun read. So I was super excited to get through the rest of these books, and this is the second one out of the 3 books. It is still the same characters, but in this one of her friends' brothers, or this was like her childhood friend too, I think. Honestly, I wish I read them all back to back. Like, I wish I read the first one and then went into this one right away, because honestly I was having a hard time remembering all the specific details from book number 1, but she kind of filled you in as you went through. But yeah, he ends up going missing, and he has gone missing before, so the police and some other people are not too concerned about it, so they're not like, he's also an adult, so they're not looking into this missing person case. And at this point, Pip, the main character, has created a podcast, and so the brother of the missing guy is like, hey, I need your help. And she's like, okay, let's do it. And as she's digging into everything, she finds out more things about more people, about the town that she lives in, and ultimately, you know, you get the whole story of of what happens in this book, which I don't want to give away. This was still a great read. I read it within a few days. These are such easy books to get through because they're just, the way she writes is, I really enjoy. I think she's a great writer. This was definitely not as good as book number 1. Just the storyline in general was not as exciting, but there were definitely parts of it that were pretty like, oh wow, that's, you know, that's crazy type of thing. So as far as a rating goes, I would say this is still going to be up there. I would give it like a 3.75, maybe a 4, but I would still just highly recommend this trilogy. Like, if you want something enjoyable, easy to get through. If the first book, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, I feel like is a good, like if you are somebody who doesn't read but wants to get into reading, that's a good place to start. Or if you're in a book rut and you haven't read that, I think that's a good book to start with. And yeah, I would still forever recommend this trilogy just because it's so fun. So I did continue right after into As Good as Dead. I love the cover of this. I think it's so cool. This one was interesting. I had filmed myself about midway through this book talking about it because I just needed to talk about it. Unfortunately, I lost that clip. It won't work, and I had mentioned that in one of my vlogs. That's why I didn't like upload that vlog. But that part of the book was really scary, and it was like stressing me out, and I just had to keep going. Like it was, I just needed to know what was going to happen. The feelings I felt in this were similar to what I felt in The Good Daughter during one of the scenes. If there's ever a scene where things are being described where the person cannot breathe, that really stresses me out. Like I start to not panic, you know, I know that it's a book, but it like, I guess gets my heart racing a little bit because I am somewhat claustrophobic, and I know that like if I were in that situation, I would not do well, you know? And I was surprised because halfway through, I don't think it was even halfway through when this really scary scene happened. And I was like, what more is going to happen, you know? Like, because good things started to come, and then I'm like, how is there still more than half of this book left for me to go? Like, there's going to be something that's really different than what I'm expecting. And there was. And I did not like where she took this. I did not like the character's decision. I think it ruined it. Like, I feel like I was disappointed in what she ended up doing and just the whole thing. Because if I could have spoken to her, I would have been like, no, let's do this instead because you're gonna be fine, type of thing. What she ended up doing and getting other people involved in doing, I was like, that's awful. First of all, this girl, Pip, what she has gone through between the first book, the second book, and the beginning of this book is so traumatizing. Like, anybody who would go through that would be depressed or like have serious mental issues. And she actually mentions like in this book that she did go to therapy for some sessions, but then she like lied to her family and said that she was fine so she could stop going. And I'm like, girl, you need to keep going to therapy because what she has experienced is really traumatic. And then the decision that she makes with this just makes it 10 times worse in my opinion. And I just don't like where this goes, especially toward the end. Like each decision that she makes because of this one large decision is just like worse and worse and worse. And I didn't like where she took this book. I think it would have been better if it would have went the way that I wanted it to. So I still would give this, I would say this one is still a 4 stars because it's a super entertaining read, but I think it could have been better. And like the writing is still just as good, but the plot, it's disappointing, I would say, just because of the decision she makes, if that makes any sense. After that, I read The 7-Year Slip. This one I was very much looking forward to, and I would say that this one did not disappoint. This is by Ashley Poston, by the way. I'm sure many of y'all have heard about it, but the way she writes is really nice. Like, it's really easy to get into and pay attention. With this one, the main character, her name is Clementine, and she ends up living in her late aunt's apartment. And her aunt, when she was growing up, her aunt always told her, like, this place is magical, and she didn't really believe it. But then, when she's moved into this place, she experiences that magic. And what happens is it goes 7 years back in time for her. So she'll be in present time sometimes, and then there's no warning when she's going to go backwards in time. But she'll, like, walk into her apartment, and then it's 7 years in the past. And in the past, there is this guy who ends up moving into the apartment, and she's like, what are you doing here? Like, this is my apartment, you need to get out, that type of situation. But then she lets him stay. And this is a romance book, so obviously you can kind of see where that's going. But then she'll go back to present time, and then, yeah, months later is when she gets to experience 7 months in the past again. So the book was pretty predictable. Like, there were parts that I was like, oh, that's what's gonna happen type of thing, but I didn't find a problem with that. I would say that this is, like, definitely worth a read. I would give it like a 4, maybe 4.25 stars. I really enjoyed the banter between the two of them, and also she was like kind of funny, which I appreciated, and I liked the guy in the book. Like, everything about this was really good, and it's probably a book I would read again in the future, and definitely a romance book that I would recommend to others. So, love this one. After that, I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. Now, a few months ago, I read my first Frida McFadden book, and that was Never Lie. Remember me talking about that? I didn't like it. I did not like the way she wrote. It was not an exciting book to me, but this was a different story. This was so fun. I finished it in probably within like 24, 30 hours. Like, I just wanted to keep reading it, and any chance that I could, I did read it. It was just so fun. The main character in this book is Millie, and she is having she actually like lives out of her car, and she is trying to find a job, and she ends up getting an interview with this the house that she ends up being a housemaid for, and it's like a really nice house, and they want her to live there, and she's like, there's no way I'm gonna get this, and blah blah blah. She ends up getting the job. There's a woman and her husband, and then they have a daughter. There's a daughter there, and this woman is kind of like crazy. Is like, when you're reading it, she's so annoying, like almost unbearable, and just like psychotic. Just she'll ask for one thing, but then the next day or within a few hours, she's like, why would you do that? And then the housemaid is like, because you asked me to, type of thing, you know, but she doesn't want to get fired, so yeah. This ends up taking a fun little twist, and just the whole time, I just wanted to keep on reading it, and I feel like looking back on it, it is pretty predictable, but I had no time to even guess. Like, I didn't care to guess anything because I just kept reading it, you know? I was just like, let me keep going. I'm not going to even think about what could actually be happening, and I really enjoyed reading this. As far as a rating goes, I would say this is like a 4.5 out of 5. This kind of gives me Verity vibes by Colleen Hoover, and I think that's a really good book. But this one is, yeah, it's just super easy to get through, and just so it's so fun and enjoyable. Also, the end of it was just like perfect, and yeah, I really liked it. And I read some of the negative reviews that people left, and were saying like, I just didn't find the negative reviews to be a good reason to give it a negative review, you know? Definitely worth reading. Much better than Never Lie. And then the final book that I read in January was ACOTAR, or A Court of Thorns and Roses. The first Sarah J. Maas book that I've ever read, and I was very excited to get started on this. I've had this book for well over a year, and I just haven't started it because I didn't want to, I was like not scared, but like, you have to commit to reading 5 pretty long books, you know? So I took my time with getting to this one. I feel like I'm late to the game on this one, so probably everybody has read it, but the main character of this book, her name is Farah, and I don't know why I didn't know that this book involved fairies. Like, that was exciting, because I ended up liking the Cruel Prince trilogy, and that was fairies, and I thought this was cool that it was also fairies. What's interesting too is kind of the overlap between the two. This was written before The Cruel Prince, so I don't know if she got some inspo from Sarah J. Maas, but they do kind of have some overlap, like same characteristics from that world to this world, but there are still some differences. And Farah, she lives, like, she's poor, takes care of her family, she goes hunting for them and that sort of thing. And one day she's out hunting and ends up killing a really large wolf. And she's like, but that's not a fairy or whatever. So she comes back home, is able to feed her family. But eventually, a few days later, one of the fairies from this fairy world, it's called Prythian. I don't know. Sorry, I'm like reading the book right now and I can't even remember. There's just a lot of characters, a lot of names. That's what, with fantasy books, you have to really pay attention and get into the world. But sometimes they're hard to pronounce or it's just like a lot to keep up with. So I tend to forget, but that's not really the point. But anyways, this fairy comes and is like, you murderer, blah, blah, blah. He ends up giving Farah two options. I think one is like, oh, I'm going to kill you. Or the other one is you come to the fairy world and live out the rest of your time there. So she's like, okay, take me. And she ends up going there. And it turns into this like crazy adventure. The world is not as bad as she expects. And there's a reason for that. And then ultimately she finds out that she is a very important person for this world. And I don't want to give anything away, but let's just say she goes through a lot throughout this book, especially toward the end. I wouldn't say it's thriller, but it's like scary fantasy things. I was expecting this to be one of the best books I've ever read. You know, based off of what everybody says about this series, I think the books I've heard, maybe, which one is the best? A Court of Wings and Ruin, maybe, that people like the most. Okay, so for the rating of this, I would say it's like 4 out of 5, 3.75 or 4 out of 5. Because it's a pretty large book. How many pages? Over 400, and I finished it within a few days. Like, I did want to keep reading it. I was engaged the whole time. It's a pretty easy world to understand. There are some harder names and words to pronounce, but it's nothing complex where it's like, oh, I can't imagine that, or oh, I can't remember this and that. So I did enjoy the world building of this, and I really liked some of the characters throughout this and getting to know some of their stories. But I was expecting this to be like such an amazing book, and just because of what other people have said, and I wouldn't say it's there, especially because I'm on the second book, and so far it's taken me just a lot longer to get through because there are some parts of it that are slower. But I know that with Sarah J. Maas, I think that's the way she writes. Like, the reason she does everything, like, she has a reason for everything that she writes, and it's going to come up in later parts of the series. But I'm not 100%. I'm excited, though, to continue the series, and will keep you posted, of course. Really good reading month overall. I did enjoy all of them, and I'm also really proud of myself for reading 6 books. Like, it's a lot of pages that I read in there. Plus, this year I want to read 50 books, so started off strong on that goal. It really doesn't matter how many books you read. That's just a personal goal that I put in place. But let me know if y'all have read any of these and what you thought of them, or if you want to read them. And also, please feel free to share what you're currently reading and your thoughts. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.